My unorthodox peek at enlightenment, or something like it at least. You've probably heard a description of what enlightenment is or what the experience of it is like. It's often hard to imagine the experience. It's not usually described concretely, but sometimes it will be presented as having made a sudden realization about life. When I was a kid, I used to think, if they've realized something, why don't they just tell us what it is? The wax on, wax off scene in Karate Kid really bugged me when I first saw it. I was thinking, this is stupid, just tell him why he has to wax and paint all his crap. Sadly, in the way explaining a joke ruins the punchline, you have to get it for yourself. Neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Newberg describes the Enlightenment Big E experience slightly more specifically.
The Big E experiences are usually those experiences that are are life-changing. They're mind-blowing, they change everything about the way you think, about the world, about life, about death. It changes everything about who you are. The experience is the most powerful experience they have ever had.
Now, I'm certainly not making the audacious claim that I am enlightened. What I'm trying to say is that I had an experience 2 Saturdays ago that included a massive realization about life. The experience changed how I think about the world, and the specific elements within the experience were particularly intense. I'm only saying that while temporary, it was a truly enlightening experience. Now, when I write, I try not to preach to the converted. I want to open up people to new ideas. This, though, is particularly difficult to do with what I'm about to discuss. This thing is naturally occurring in plants that people have been using for more than 9,000 years. It improves visual acuity. It has incredibly positive effects in treating depression, anxiety, and addiction. The plants, actually they're not plants, they're fungi, are mushrooms that contain the natural hallucinogen psilocybin. Now, for most people, LSD or acid is what comes to mind when the word hallucinogen comes up. It's easily understandable that the general public assumes LSD is highly dangerous, considering the Controlled Substance Act claims that LSD has no potential for medical use and a high potential for abuse. Despite some incredibly positive medical applications that were being seen since the 1950s, LSD was made illegal in 1968. Psilocybin, the hallucinogen in mushrooms, got lumped in with LSD as an illegal Schedule I substance in 1970. I had always accepted hallucinogens as just 100% bad, but once I watched Roland Griffith's TED Med talk, my mind started to change.
80% of the volunteers, after having 1 or 2 high doses of psilocybin, reported that the experience was among the 5 most personally meaningful and spiritually significant experiences of their lives. And what this graphic shows is the percentage of volunteers showing clinically significant improvement in depressed mood. Such an effect actually is unprecedented within the field of psychiatry. Another population we've looked at are cigarette smokers seeking abstinence. In this study, volunteers had up to 3 psilocybin sessions. At 6 months, we have 80% abstinence rates.
Okay, so the substance improves your mental health, and it is essentially the opposite of addicting. But what about its toxicity? How easy is it to overdose? Well, psilocybin in its isolated form is incredibly rare and expensive, which is why anyone using it will take it via ingesting the mushrooms. Based on animal studies, the LD50 lethal dose for psilocybin is about 285 milligrams per kilogram. Psilocybin content in dry mushrooms varies from 0.2% to 2.3%. Let's use the median at 1%. So how many grams of dried mushrooms would I have to take for it to be lethal? I weigh 77 kilograms, so I would need to get into my body 21,945 milligrams or 21.9 grams of psilocybin for it to be lethal. Now that's just the psilocybin. This only constitutes 1% of the dried mushrooms. So I would need to eat 2.194 kilograms of dried mushrooms for it to kill me. This is 731 times that of the normal 3 grams necessary to have a trip. And by the way, if you've eaten 1 kilogram of anything in one sitting, your meal was probably free and your picture is up on some wall now. After understanding all of this, I became open to trying psilocybin mushrooms someday. However, I do enjoy the perks that come with being a law-abiding citizen, so I had no intent to act on it. That was until I had plans to travel to Europe, and learned that in the Netherlands, psilocybin-containing magic truffles are completely legal. Long story short, I tried the truffles. I tried a bit more than one serving the first Saturday I arrived in Amsterdam. It took a while to kick in, and 30 minutes after eating them, I was about to conclude that the batch was bad. Then I noticed sounds and my surroundings were much more intriguing. In particular, the lines on my palm were much more thought-provoking than they had ever been. After about 5 minutes of examining my hand, it was apparent that this was not a dud batch. Then things became very odd and looked 2D. I remember being much more impressed with the music that I was listening to, saying, "What? How did they make that sound?"
Man, that guy's guitar is talking.
After a bit, I started to see some images, but I don't know if that was hallucinating. It was more like a really vivid version of daydreaming. Except I wasn't choosing what to visualize. My brain had basically sat me down in a tour bus that was going way over the speed limit. I struggled to keep up as my brain zipped me through a hyperspeed review of what I knew about the Big Bang, evolution, my life up until now. Then, out of nowhere, a spark went off in my head and I had this burst of laughter that sprung out of me. This was me experiencing the so-called cosmic joke, or cosmic giggle, which is like getting the most massive joke ever. To put this in perspective, let's use my dad's famous horse joke. It goes like this. A horse walks into a bar and the bartender says, "Hey chap, why the long face?" In your head, the moment you put the fact that horses naturally have long faces, together with the fact that long face is a phrase that refers to an expression of sadness, you have a laugh, maybe. So, getting the cosmic joke was like putting everything that I knew about the cosmos and life together into one massive punchline, and I proceeded to giggle my ass off for a very long time. If I had to attempt to describe the punchline, it would be that I accepted that I'm gonna die, and there's nothing I can do about it, and that's quite alright. Trying to wrench some meaning out of life in the meantime is utterly ridiculous. Then again, a joke isn't so funny when it's explained. This trip was one of 3. The second trip was primarily recreational. I had a nice odd time at the park. For the third trip, I was on a mission. I had been meaning to achieve a heroic dose, a term coined by Terence McKenna for a particularly strong trip that leads to a more spiritual experience. A heroic dose requires a little over twice as much as what I had the first time, but I thought I might have a tolerance from the first 2 trips, so just to be safe, I took 3 times the normal dose. This is where I broke through into something else, and had the enlightening experience. So if the giggle in the first trip was like walking up to a house and peeking in through the window, then the heroic trip was like being shot through a cannon and bursting through the door. This time the effects were significantly stronger, and I didn't even have the capacity to giggle. Any sense of self I had completely dissolved, and I experienced the strongest feelings of contentment, belonging, compassion, amazement, and a couple of other emotions I didn't even know I had. This all came out in one massive burst. At one point I was sure I was dead, but it didn't bother me. I thought, so this is why we die, so we get to experience this. Fearing death is so silly. At the time, this thought wasn't really words in my head or a sub-vocalization, it was just a spark. When my sense of self finally reappeared, it was like being reborn, with a complete lack of fear. The thought that I had ever had any fear of failure, rejection, embarrassment, or even worried about anything in general made me chuckle. Okay, so this was a wonderful experience for me, but am I saying that everyone should try psilocybin? Well, no, it's hard to say. First, obviously I do not advocate using substances where they are illegal. Then, I can't even guess whether you'll have a similar experience. There's a chance you may hate it as much as I loved it. And, do I think magic mushrooms should be legal everywhere? Well, I don't think they should be any more illegal than driving a car. But driving a car without a license is and should be illegal. If you don't understand how the car works and aren't sure how to drive it, you're going to have a bad time and could be a proper pain in the ass for others. Now, I'm by no means saying that this is better or even entirely similar to enlightenment through meditation. Using psychedelics might sound like cheating or artificial assistance to having a spiritual experience. But I agree with Dr. Newberg's example that using psychedelics to have a spiritual experience is no more of a cheat than putting on glasses to see the world more clearly. For me, this psychedelic experience was just a peek at what achieving enlightenment might be like. If you're interested in this, you can do all the research on the biology and neurochemistry behind it and read all the trip reports you want, but none of that will even come close to experiencing it for yourself. Just be safe, do your research, and keep it legal.
We're not gonna learn it from Der Spiegel, from Time magazine. It doesn't come like that. Direct experience, your opinion, your feelings, your sexuality is the only real thing in your universe.
If you like this, make sure to subscribe. I'm putting up new videos as frequently as I can. You can see my last two less controversial videos here.